it would not be typical for us to engage allies and partners on something that is utter and complete nonsense and that should be rejected out of hand by anyone who is looking at it through through an objective lens.
The U.S. government rejects a bombshell report by Pulitzer Prize veteran investigative journalist Seymour Hersh entitled How America Took Out the Nord Stream Pipeline, which alleges that the United States, with Norway's assistance, blew up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 natural gas pipelines in a covert operation last September. Seymour Hersh joins me to discuss his report. Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry. The attack on the Nord Stream pipelines on September 26, 2022 was carried out by the US Navy and the CIA under direct orders from President Biden. That is the claim made in a piece published on February 8th on Substack, an online platform by former New York Times and Pulitzer Prize investigative reporter Seymour Hersh. According to Hersh, U.S. Navy divers placed C4 charges, a high-yield chemical explosive, on the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines in June 2022 at locations identified by the Norwegian Navy. The White House, the State Department, and the CIA rejected Hersh's report outright, calling it utterly false and fiction. The Norwegian government, incriminated in the report, also denied the allegations. Last February, standing next to the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the White House, President Biden made these startling remarks in response to questions by a German reporter.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that? Exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Following the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines last September, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this.
This is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to, once and for all, remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for the years to come.
Joining me now to discuss his latest piece on the US and Norway's reported sabotage of the Nord Stream natural gas pipelines between Russia and Germany is Seymour Hersh, who first gained international recognition for exposing the 1969 My Lai massacre, the wanton killing by the US military during the Vietnam War of over 500 Vietnamese children, women, and the elderly, and the cover-up that followed, for which he received the Pulitzer Prize Award in 1970. Hersh, who wrote for the New York Times and the New Yorker magazine, also broke the Abu Ghraib prisoner torture scandal in 2004. He is the recipient of 5 George Polk Awards and 2 National Magazine Awards and is the author of 11 books. Seymour Hersh, welcome to the program.
Hi, glad to be here.
Now, whoever followed what was labeled as the quote-unquote sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines should have been mystified by 2 aspects of it. The enormity of this act, not to mention the environmental dimension of it, and the silence that followed it, at least here in the West. It didn't cost lives except for marine life, but it was an act of epic proportions. The destruction in just one go of a $25 billion energy infrastructure. What was your initial reaction when you heard the news?
I think knowing the long history of American hostility to Russian gas in Europe, I mean, my first inclination is I'd actually heard the president in a news conference say in February that we can destroy Nord Stream 1, and Nord Stream 2 rather, the new pipeline. And I knew that the Germans had sanctioned it, so they had control. The German government had control of the pipeline. I guess my first thought was, I can't believe that my government did it, but I wondered. That's all. That was my first thought.
But did you immediately wonder that it could be the United States? Because when you fast forward to your piece, it's a bombshell piece, isn't it? A 3-month-long investigation in which you write, quote, "Last June, the Navy divers, the US Navy divers, operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22, planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning." And you write this, Seymour Hersh, you say from its earliest days, Nord Stream 1 was seen by Washington and its anti-Russian NATO partners as a threat to Western dominance. And of course, a lot of the official statements that we heard in Washington, some of them quite startling, do emphasize the point that you make, that Washington wanted to see the end of Nord Stream 1 and now Nord Stream 2. But would they have gone as far as to plant these bombs, knowing that if it was found out, this could be seen as an act of war? And this, again, is an act of war against NATO allies and against Germany.
Well, that's the key, critical point. The critical point, it was always understood if they actually did it, the goal would be to isolate, to deny. You have to understand the gas that Russia was providing. Russia's full of gas, the Caspian Sea and not the Caspian Seas in Siberia, in places like that. They have enormous reserves of gas, methane gas, and so the issue was that for years, industry in Germany and Western Europe was running on cheap gas that was, and a lot of it, so much so that the Russian gas was pouring in to the point where where the Germans began to actually resell some of it to other people in Western Europe for profit. But none of that bothered the Russians, or Putin, if you will, because because the pipeline was 51% owned by Gazprom, which is controlled by oligarchs who always make sure that the Russian government gets a share. In some years, it was $40 billion profits for Russia out of this one pipeline. It's an enormous money deal. And so there was always the notion that as long as Russia had, Germany had the opportunity to open, they controlled the pipeline. They had shut it down. As long as the German government could open it again, that was a potential problem for us, particularly if the war in Ukraine went bad. And that was going in the fall, last fall, it was going bad. There was a great disparity between what the American and even the British community was reporting privately and what was being published in the papers. The newspapers in America were much more optimistic about the war. And in the long run, the idea that Ukraine could stand off Russia, which is so much more arms. So it's a state-run government. The arms business there is state-run. We in the West, we have to go to contract independent companies to get weapons built, sign contracts. It takes time.
But if this is the case, though, if it is, as you outline it, it is very strange, isn't it, that there was no major investigation, that Congress didn't get more involved than it has, that the media hasn't really picked up on very much, certainly in the West. I mean, the article you wrote was flatly dismissed pre-publication by the US government as pure nonsense, as fiction. Nothing surprising there, I suppose. But were you pressured not to publish the piece? And did you offer your piece to your former employer, the New York Times? Not a word was published in there.
The media's changed since I worked at the New York Times. I wrote stories for 7, 8 years and won a lot of prizes, et cetera, a lot of stuff about the CIA, always without unnamed sources. The issue now is that America is polarized, pretty much like the rest of the world. Trump changed everything, and you're either now for the Democrats or you're for the Republicans, so the New York Times is, I don't know, I can't explain them. No, I never thought of going to the Times or the Washington Post. I was always thought of, I didn't know about Substack.
Are you surprised, though, that the New York Times, the Washington Post did not mention a word about your piece?
No, I'm not surprised. The word I would use is I'm ashamed for them, but I understand that, there's a lot of pressure. If you don't want to run a story, you say it's based on anonymous sources. It was okay when I worked there. They published them all. So at this point, nobody wants the story because they also view it as inadvertently, I mean, in terms of me personally, because I do this story, that somehow means a lot of people conclude that I'm pro-Russian, which is just bizarre. You know, nobody could support. Putin started the most bloody war in Western Europe since World War II. You can't support that, but you also can't acknowledge that it wasn't because there was 31 years of us disregarding our promises not to expand NATO. Everybody knows that story, and we're putting missiles on the border of Russia and Poland that could be very easily turned into nuclear carrying missiles.
But looking at the questions asked, or more likely the questions that were not asked after this act of quote-unquote sabotage, what you say now was a blatant attack by the United States with the help of Norway. Mainstream media in Europe was not much better either. There wasn't much coverage, even in Norway, which pulled the trigger, so to speak. So the question is, can it be ignored and for how long?
I'm just going to say, don't worry about lack of interest. I mean, I've been getting 300 or 400 emails a day for the last 10 days. I mean, it's an amazing. There was a tremendous disconnect between what the pipeline being sabotaged and the quiet all along. Nobody claimed nobody claimed responsibility for it. We did, and we in the beginning we sort of suggested. Our leaders suggested that maybe Russia did it, which is totally crazy and wasn't accepted. And so all I did really? All I did in this story is just deconstruct the obvious. It was just an obvious story. And what I did is I found people that told me some facts about it. There's still more to come. I still know more. And the way you described it is perfect. It really was a blow it wasn't a blow to support the American operation and support for Ukraine. It was a blow to make sure President Biden was worried that Ukraine, his support for Ukraine wasn't as appreciated as much by NATO and Western Europe. I think NATO was more for it, but Western Europe had a problem. The Germans had a problem with it. And I think his worry was in late September when he ordered the bomb, the mines that actually were explosive, C4, when he ordered them to be triggered, they had been placed in place months earlier. I think his thought was simply that, okay, it looks like it's going to be a long drawn out war. I want to make sure I get support from Germany. Germany has stopped the pipeline, but if it gets cold, this is September, October, November, if it gets cold, they may just turn it back on. They had the power to do so.
You just said there is more to come in your investigation. What else can we expect? And how do you address the issue of what your critics have suggested, that this lacks a little credence because they say you rely on just the one source? Is that the case?
I can't talk about sources because this is I can't talk about sources. I'm talking about an operation that I honestly don't believe the White House ever had a full briefing on because it was so secret. I'm sure they know more now that I've started writing about it. The secrecy was intense about this. And so I can't talk about it. I can also tell you, I've been doing this for 50 years with unnamed sources. And I've never had anybody lose a job or be published or be made public because of what I've done. So I'm very careful about that.
You said the White House wasn't interested in pursuing the truth, but can Congress accept the administration's denials without its own inquest? Because on the day you published your piece, Republican Senator Mike Lee tweeted, "I'm troubled that I cannot immediately rule out the suggestion that the US blew up Nord Stream. I checked with a bunch of Senate colleagues. Among those I've asked, none were ever briefed on this. If it turns out to be true, we've got a huge problem." So my question is, can it be proven untrue without an independent investigation?
You mean, can it be proven untrue or true? What do you mean by that? Can it be proven that maybe the United States did not do it without an investigation?
Yes, I mean, will Congress ask for an investigation?
Congress? Really? Congress? You have such faith. That's wonderful.
Will some members of Congress push for an independent investigation?
No. I think Congress has enough sense to know what they would find out if they did an investigation.
Did Biden's order violate U.S. law by ordering such a covert operation without congressional approval? If Senator Mike Lee's words are to be taken at face value, he says neither he nor any of his colleagues in the Senate were in the know about this operation.
I actually did a lot of, when as you mentioned, I learned about this many months ago, and I spent a long time looking at the legal aspects of what he did. There's an awful lot of laws suggesting that there would, if the Nord Stream 2 is owned by stockholders, shareholders. If the shareholders wanted to sue, and it could be proven that, let's say, it fell to the White House, there would be a very serious legal case involved. Whether it's a crime, it's an act of war. I would guess it could be construed as that, but turns out on the books, because the law about undersea cables really dates back more than 1884, when telegraph lines were first put into effect. And there was a law about inadvertent breaking a telegraph line, but there's no specific law saying this bombing a pipeline is a crime, but that's only because it hasn't happened. And I'm sure once responsibility was made known, it would be treated as a crime and be, but probably in a court of international law, a war crime. These are all very sophisticated questions, legal questions, for which I promise you I read maybe 12 or 15 law review articles. It's a little bit unclear, but it's certainly for damages. There would be extreme billions of dollars in damages could be claimed by shareholders. But it's very strange to me that without a finding of who did it, who's going to sue? So that's a very interesting question that it's unresolved.
But it's a very bold accusation, though, you make. And it goes directly to the White House and the president himself, who you say ordered this act and this action. Hold on, but if it is an act of war, doesn't it mean that it then, by extension, it is a crime? I mean, in your piece, you even mentioned that someone in the planning team said that if it was ever traced back to the United States, it would be an act of war.
There's ways of, you're talking to somebody who did a story about the My Lai massacre that was never treated as an act of war by my government. It was never treated under the Geneva Convention. I honestly don't think it'll ever get to a court of law where the question of whether the president authorized something that was illegal. We're not going to get there. It's not going to happen. I mean, let's be realistic about it. Maybe it should in a perfect world, but this isn't Plato's Republic we live in. This is a very tough world these days with a lot of terrible things happening. More and more and more as we spin out of control. And so, no, I'm not worried about that. I don't think we're ever going to get a resolution because I don't think I'm getting ahead of myself. It doesn't matter what I think. I wrote a story that said they did it, period. And described what happened. And that's enough for now for me. And it's I'm glad you're raising all these questions, but you're actually, it's sort of interesting. In all the interviews I've had, you're the first person the first group to look ahead. You are looking ahead, and that's great. But it's very much unresolved until you know who did it. Until somebody is found to be the culprit, how are you going to prosecute it? What international court is going to do it? And my instinct is the White House loves the situation it has right now, which is that they've denied it, and that's it. And the fact that the New York Times and Washington Post and other papers with substantial assets aren't investigating it is fine with them. And the fact that I had to go to a Substack, it's actually a wonderful facility because I'm basically self-publishing material. Although, of course, I have good editors and fact checkers, as I did at the New Yorker, the same procedure I use. But I don't think this is ever going to get resolved.
You don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of
No, you're going to have my story saying it.
It is an extraordinary move, though, isn't it? A very risky one, too. I mean, could it bring down the Biden administration? What happens if tomorrow the German government accuses Washington of being behind this?
Well, the last I heard, I believe it or not, I hear the chancellor's coming, Chancellor Schultz, the Christian Democrat, who's coming. He's coming to Washington. I hear he's coming in the next 10 days, like a good puppy, to sit there and say, we don't know. But inside, it's boiling inside. I will tell you, I've avoided. I don't talk to politicians. I just don't do it as a matter of just self-preservation. But I do know that in the Bundestag, the German parliament, there's an awful lot of concern about what the chancellor knew and when he did.
Do you think public opinion in Germany will eventually demand the truth, compel the truth? Do you think German Chancellor Schultz was in the know?
Well, that's the key question. The key question is when earlier this year in February, the president made that statement, a very clear threat. It was a year ago, actually, right before the Russians invaded. By this time, he'd set up a committee, and the committee of experts in the spy world, or spook business, said, we can do it. We can do it. We think we can do it. And so he had the knowledge. At this point, there was no question that the Russians were going to invade. Schultz was there with him, and the president then made a threat about, we can stop Nord Stream 2, the new one. We can do it. We know how. And Schultz was there. And when, in the article I wrote, I left out the Schultz's. He's generally said, I support America. I support this policy. But I didn't want to leave the implication that Schultz said that he was aware of the pipeline being destroyed and he was aware of it. We don't know what the president said to Schultz. I do think he was had been urged not to disclose it. It was very secret, this capability. He knew nothing about the details. He just knew the capability. But of course, the problem with the president, he's given to speaking. He's given to saying things abruptly that he should. For example, that what he just said in that speech was very troubling to the people planning this. What's the sense of planning a covert mission if the president starts talking about it? But that passed. I think the issue, as I said earlier, the German parliament, the Bundestag, this isn't going away in Germany.
If the truth is what you assert,
the truth is what I said. Stop.
And if it is accepted,
I'm telling you, it is.
So if it is accepted by some European governments, a deliberate attack by the United States against European interests, against allies, what does it do to NATO? Could this operation backfire on the US and NATO? Because as much as it may have been targeting Russia by seeking to stop the sale of natural gas to Europe, although Russia can obviously sell it to other markets, but it was cheap natural gas that Europe was relying on, it's probably more punishing long-term on the German economy, as you say, and on others who've been using this cheap natural gas for over 5 decades.
You want to get silly about it. You could have a bet, like a betting on Premier League soccer. Which NATO country is going to withdraw first from NATO? That's the kind of thinking that goes on.
I just wonder, you think that could actually happen? Could it break up NATO in any way?
Oh, it doesn't matter what I think.
What's your sense about what impact this will have on NATO countries?
I'm going to, look, it did happen. And I've been in the business, I've had tough stories before. It happened. We did it. And we can't talk about it. We hope. I think their intention is to never do anything but deny it. Never, never, never. No matter, you can have films of somebody doing it. And that's probably the only way they can go right now.
So we will never get to the bottom of it. You don't think we will?
The bottom of it, you're making a pun about what happened to the pipeline, right? The bottom, right? And all that? No?
Yep. You don't think we will?
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Get to the, anyway, but this is going to be a very serious political issue for the next few months. I guarantee you that. And I'm not bragging about it. I'm just enraged that my country would do something so stupid and then not tell the truth about it.
All right. Seymour Hersh, a great pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you so much for making the time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Seymour Hersh is a living journalistic legend, and at 85, he proves that he still has plenty of gas in the tank. Whether his bombshell report accusing the United States and its president of ordering a dangerous James Bond-like operation will be followed up and give rise to serious investigations in Europe and here in the US that would establish who was behind this brazen act of war remains to be seen. And so, in short, it is still unclear if what happened in the depths of the Baltic Sea on September 26, 2022, will remain there, or if it will eventually bubble up to the surface. Destroying the pipelines, which Secretary Blinken saw as a, quote, tremendous opportunity, reminds me of what NATO's First Secretary General, the Briton Lord Hastings Lionel Ismay, once famously said, that the North Atlantic Alliance was created to, quote, keep the Soviet Union out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. That's all from me, Ghida Fakhry, and the team in Washington. Thanks for watching.